All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I want to make another special thank you to our sponsors of the event, the Hoover Institution, and the Stanford Review newspaper, and the Stanford Conservative Society. You're all part of one of these organizations, probably. And we want to thank Bill Whalen as well. He is an expert political commentator on California and U.S. politics, as well as a multiple number of campaigns and elections. He's a writer for the LA Times, the Weekly Standard, and the San Francisco Chronicle. He's worked as a consultant on a number of campaigns and elections, and as a chief speechwriter for Governor Pete Wilson of California from 1994 to 1999. And I want everyone to please join me in thanking Bill Whalen for speaking to us today.
Thank you, Tommy. I assume the choice is either me or the crazy guy who stands outside Tressidor each day and talks about global conspiracies. So,
Tough choice.
So let's talk politics, and not so much the national scene, because you probably got a big dose of that yesterday with Evan Bayh's announcement that he's not seeking another term. Long story short, on the national scene, it is like going over to Maples and watching a basketball game where Stanford has about a 12-point lead with a minute to go, and you think the game's over. This is how the Democrats view it. Then all of a sudden there's a basket, 10 points, big deal. And all of a sudden a steal, three-pointer, now it's down to 7 points. Then another steal, another basket, now it's a two-possession game, and now you're sweating. The clock can't run out. And this is the spot the Democrats are in right now. They are worried that the clock is running against them and the momentum's against them. Come on in. The Senate right now is, well, the House, first of all, the House. The Democrats have a 40-seat majority in the House. As of about a month or two ago, that looked pretty much impenetrable. In fact, Michael Steele, the Republican National Committee chairman, was here a few weeks ago. We asked him, how many seats do you think you'll pick up? He said 25, maybe 30 if we're lucky. He was lowballing us, I think. He probably was hoping for 35, maybe even the magical 40. But that 40 looks more doable than it did a few weeks ago. The sure sign is these people like Patrick Kennedy retiring from Rhode Island. They're getting out of step before the voters do it for them. The Senate is, to me, the fascinating thing to watch right now, in part because of the Evan Bayh announcement yesterday. The Republicans need to pick up 8 seats to force a 49-49-2 tie. And if you look at the numbers right now, 8 seats is very doable if the Republicans run the table. There are 5 Democrat seats that are toss-ups around the country. There are 2 that are leading Republican, and there's 1 which is viewed as likely Republican, that's Delaware. If the Republicans go a perfect 8 for 8 in those races and hold on to all of their vulnerable seats, and they have about a half a dozen vulnerable seats themselves, we seem to forget about this always, then they force a 49-49-2 tie in the Senate. There are 2 independents in the Senate. Bernie Sanders of Vermont, who's a socialist. He's a registered socialist. He literally is. He votes Democratic. And then there's Joe Lieberman from Connecticut, who's the other independent. So in a 49-49-2 scenario, Joe Lieberman is suddenly the most popular man in Washington, and you'll see both parties pull at him. The Republicans will probably try very hard to get him over in their column. Another person who benefits under this scenario of 49-49-2 is Barbara Boxer. If the Democrats come to the conclusion that, holy smokes, we're going to lose all 8 of these seats, then what they're going to do is fight to the death to retain those 2 seats right now that are viewed as lean Democratic. And one of those is in Connecticut, and the other one is here in California with her seat. So suddenly she'll be a big beneficiary under this scenario. California, to me, is very interesting to look at this year, the Senate race and the gubernatorial race, and they're interesting for entirely different reasons. The Senate race, to me, is interesting because it tests the Tea Party movement and the strength or lack thereof of anti-incumbency in this country. Barbara Boxer, on paper, should be in big trouble right now. She's been in office for 3 terms now. She doesn't have a very accomplished record. You think of Boxer, you don't think necessarily of big accomplishments. You think more of Feinstein in terms of actually doing the heavy pulling inside the Senate. Boxer's a fighter. She's always benefited from, number 1, having a very good draw each time she's run for re-election, but then secondly, running in the right year. She ran in 1992, the first time around. It was a year when George H.W. Bush decided not to run in California, basically pulled the rug out from Republicans here in California. She snuck in. She ran for re-election in 1998 when Gray Davis won the state by 20 points. So she had a nice draft to tap into. Then she ran a 3rd time in 2004 when John Kerry beat George Bush out here by about 12, 13 points. And again, the Republicans didn't really have a statewide effort. In fact, her opponent that year, Bill Jones, didn't have enough money to run a single statewide TV ad. And in California, when you don't have any money to advertise in television, you're kind of the equivalent of the tree falls in the forest. If nobody's around, does it make a sound? Jones finished 1 million votes behind George Bush in that election, and you know how popular President Bush was in California during his 8 years. This time around, though, she has a problem, and that's the climate. and it's an anti-incumbent climate, and so she should be targeted. Secondly, the things which she does make a name for herself in Washington, primarily cap and trade, is going to become a very, very complicated issue in California. Governor Schwarzenegger's landmark achievement, the one thing he would point to as governor that he's most proud of, is AB 32, which you may or may not have heard of. It's a global, it's a greenhouse gas emissions curbing bill, which he signed into law. Meg Whitman is running to impose a one-year moratorium on it in the governor's race. Boxer wants to do cap and trade legislation in the Senate. I expect to see her Republican opponent to run at her night and day, criticizing her for cap and trade as a job killer in California. It'll put her on the defensive on that issue. Interesting enough, at the same time when you find the global warming movement itself also on the defensive as well. But the other problem she will have is just the anti-incumbency sentiment out there and how she'll have to defend herself in her job in Washington. So what she'll do? She'll attack. And she's already started attacking this campaign. She was attacking last year. She did her best to paint a negative picture of Carly Fiorina, the former HP chairman, and every time her spokespeople or campaign people talked, they uttered two words: failed CEO. In politics, it's called bracketing. In Silicon Valley, you'd call it branding. And they want voters to think, when they think of Carly Fiorina, a failed CEO. It's like when you watch Sean Hannity and he talks about Al Franken, now U.S. Senator, you'll call him what? A failed talk show host. It's called branding, trying to put in people's minds that this person is not an achiever. So she's going to push that very hard. She's going to bring into another element of this anti-incumbency, and that's how well do attack politics work in this day and age. How many of you followed the New Jersey governor's race? Okay, a few showing of hands. I think what you saw in that was a couple of things. Number one, a lot of frustration with John Corzine, the Democratic governor, and his performance in office. But secondly, I think what backfired on him was attack politics. He went after Christie in professional ways. He went after him in very personal ways. He called him fat. Now, if I'm running a campaign in New Jersey, I'm not going to call somebody fat. You're going to offend a lot of fat voters if you do that, so not smart politics. People, I think, had a visceral reaction to that, and that'll be a question with Boxer as she runs in California. If she's going to attack the Republican nominee, as I suspect she will there be a backlash? Will people say, well, geez, she's been doing this for 18 years now, enough is enough, time for new blood? The question, of course, is who is she going to have as an opponent? Three people running in that race right now: Carly Fiorina, who I mentioned, Tom Campbell, former Stanford law professor here, also a finance director for Governor Schwarzenegger, a U.S. congressman from down in San Jose. He jumped out of the governor's race into the Senate side. He's now the front runner according to the polls. And then the third candidate, Chuck DeVore. He's from Orange County. He's an assemblyman from Orange County, and he's putting the Tea Party movement to a test. He goes out rather assiduously and talks to Tea Party meetings. He's trying to court them. And here's the question about the Tea Party in California that's worth watching. We all talked Tea Party after we saw what happened in Massachusetts with Scott Brown. He comes out of nowhere, and this was an out-of-nowhere candidate. He was a Republican state senator in Massachusetts. There are 40 state senators in Massachusetts. 5 of them are Republicans. So you talk about the few and the proud. 5 state senators. Nobody gives him a snowball's chance of winning the thing. And what does he do? He taps into the Tea Party movement. But 2 things happened for him in Massachusetts. First of all, he had a wonderful candidate to run against him, Martha Coakley, who just could not help from making mistakes. She would have you believe that Curt Schilling, who's a hero, a god of gods of the Red Sox nation, she would have you believe that he was a Yankee. Bad move as a candidate. But secondly, he tapped into the right movement in exactly the right climate. It was a special election which had a light turnout and a very quick campaign. About 2.5 million people voted in the Massachusetts special election. That's about the same number of people who voted in the California primary. DeVore's gambit is this: he doesn't have money, he doesn't have name recognition, he's not particularly beloved by the party establishment, but the conservative activists, the Tea Party libertarians who vote in Republican primary, they like him because he is an absolute, undiluted conservative. And that's what he's banking on, coming out of nowhere and stealing that primary. The problem he will have is if he wins that and goes in the general election, it's money. And I hate to be cynical about this because money obviously doesn't solve all the problems in the world, but if you don't have money in California, you don't have a chance. It's what they said in the movie The Right Stuff about the NASA program: no bucks, no Buck Rogers. It's very much the same way in California politics. If you cannot advertise, you first of all cannot introduce yourself to California voters. Secondly, you cannot make the argument against Barbara Boxer. And thirdly, you cannot make the rebuttal against whatever load of charges she inevitably is going to dump on you. So that's going to be the challenge for him. Campbell's challenge, if he is the candidate, is one of electricity. He is earnest, he is smart, I think he'd be a terrific senator, but he is not an exciting Senate candidate, plain and simple. He's not the kind of guy who gets crowds fired up. So he's going to have to find a way to spark enthusiasm. Carly Fiorina's challenge is how to rebut that failed CEO label that boxers tried to fix on her. And it's an interesting dynamic to study. Every business person in America who's run for office has run on the concept of, look what I've done with my business. Look how much money we made for our company. Look how many jobs are created. Look how much wealth we put in society. Look how much we improved the world. Her story at HP, as you know, is much more complicated than that. She had to fire people. She got caught in a very ugly merger. It cost her her job. On the one hand, it's a perfect metaphor for somebody who wants to go to Washington. She can say, look it, I made the tough choices that politicians didn't. So you should send me to Washington so I make the same tough choices I did as a business person. But on the other hand, voters are not conditioned to that kind of message. They want to hear what Meg Whitman is offering, which is, look at the wonders I did with my business. And that leads us to the governor's race. Whereas the Senate race tests the anti-incumbency sentiment and the teabagging, the Tea Party movement in America, the governor's race tests something differently, and that is what? It is, first of all, I think it is a trial run for the 2012 election, and I'll explain that in a minute. And secondly, I think it's a referendum on, you will, which is Obama mania, which is also Arnold mania. In 2003, a lot of you were still in diapers at the time, in 2003, I suspect, a guy named Arnold Schwarzenegger came along the scene in California. And he ran as a first-time candidate with no political experience outside of having served on the President's Council on Physical Fitness and having married a Kennedy. And he said, guess what? Based on what I've done in my life, based on how charming I am, how exceptional I am, I'm going to go up to Sacramento, I'm going to crack heads, and I'm going to take names, and by God, I'm going to turn this government around. And the voters at the time were fed up with government. They were mad as hell based on the electricity crisis we had, the rolling blackouts, and they were especially mad about a car tax that had been imposed upon them. You learn a funny thing in America when you travel around the states. Different states have different cultures which have certain things which you just don't touch as a button. I have family that lives in North Carolina, for example. You don't mess with tobacco in North Carolina, for example. They imposed a smoking ban in North Carolina last year. It's going to cost a bunch of lawmakers their job this year, I think, because they did this. If I went to Maine, I wouldn't mess with lobsters. In California, you don't mess with a person's car. And what happened in 2002 and 2003, when people got their vehicle license fees in the state of California, opened it up, and it suddenly gone up 30% without them knowing it. That's because a law triggered that based on the deficit in the state government, they had to up the vehicle license fee to make up for the money. Gray Davis, the governor at the time, had to do a lot of explaining to the people. People were mad and they wanted to take it out on them. And along came Arnold Schwarzenegger. Arnold in 2003 was Barack Obama in 2008, plain and simple. Barack Obama's message was, okay, I don't have the most political experience in the world, but guess what? I am charming, I'm inspirational, and I'll go to Washington and I'll clean up the place. And I'll work with people and we'll get stuff done. And just as you're seeing the public right now souring on Obama, the public is similarly here in California has soured on Arnold Schwarzenegger. This is a threshold test, I think, in the governor's race, assuming that Whitman is the nominee and Jerry Brown is her opponent. She's not going to run as Arnold Schwarzenegger. She's already picked a fight with him on global warming. She'll probably pick other fights with him as best as she can to keep Republicans happy, because Republicans aren't pleased with the governor. But at the end of the day, what she's banking on is that the spirit of Schwarzenegger exists, that the public is still hungry for somebody to come in from the outside, to go to Sacramento, not be part of the problem, but part of the solution. So she has to wager that that spirit is still there. Something else she has to figure out is the formula for how to win in what is a blue state. Can you guys name the last pro-life politician to win either a gubernatorial or Senate race in California? Sir?
Ronald Reagan.
Gubernatorial or Senate?
Didn't he win the governor's race?
66. Right. The answer is George Dumajian in 1986. Since then, we've been electing pro-choice people to those two seats. Now, Whitman is pro-choice, but it points out that Republicans do have an uphill climb in this state. To win statewide in California as a Republican candidate, you have to pull off a formula that I call 90-60-20. You have to rake in 90% of the Republican vote, and it has to be a healthy turnout of Republicans, because the Republican Party is a dying franchise in California right now. It's at about 31.5% and sinking. So you have to maximize the Republican turnout, get 90% of them. That's doable if the Republicans are fired up and they feel it's a good year, and right now they do. Then you have to pivot and you have to pick off 20% of the Democratic vote. That's doable if the Democratic candidate is not so exciting, and Jerry Brown could turn out to be a not so exciting proposition for Democrats. The trick, and where the election will be decided, is at 60% of independents, what we call declined to states in California, declined to state voters, DTSs. Leave it to the state government to come up with a three-word phrase for one word: independent, declined to state. You need to get 6 out of 10 of them, 60%, to win a statewide race in California. And what that's going to force Whitman, if she is the nominee to do at all times, is to balance. Some days she's going to have to be right of center to appease these folks. Some days she'll have to be left of center to bring them in. A very delicate balancing act. I don't know if any of you guys have ever seen a thing called a bongo board. You get on board a bongo drum with the board and you go back and forth on it, try to maintain your balance and roll it back and forth. Think of that as the candidate in California trying to get 60% of those independent votes. You're trying to show that you're environmentally sensitive, you're not opposed to offshore drilling. You care about the environment, you want to kind of cool your jets on global warming. You're maybe pro-choice on abortion, you're for parental notification at the same time. At all times, you're trying to bring in a 60% group of these independent voters and pull it off. That's the trick she's doing, and there'll be a lot of candidates who are running in 2012 who'll be watching her. The person probably watching most closely is one, Mitt Romney. Romney has a very personal connection with her. She started off life, Meg Whitman did, at Bain Company, which is Mitt Romney's company. So they have a long personal relationship going back. She was involved in his presidential effort before it flamed out. Then she went to the McCain campaign. He has a lot of his people working on her campaign, and in part, it's a testing ground for his campaign in 2012. He's going to be very curious to see what themes she pulls off, because as California goes for Republicans in 2010, you could argue so it goes for the rest of the nation in 2012. If a Republican can figure out a way to win a statewide race in California, there's no reason to believe the Republican cannot win the White House in 2012. So watch that other theme. And it'll be fascinating to watch here, because as the national race is very much a referendum on Barack Obama and his decisions, right or wrong, so too will the California race very much be a referendum on Arnold Schwarzenegger. Now for me, these are very fun days, because simply each day seems to bring something new in California, which is a gift. For example, last week, we had a big fight in Sacramento over, of all things, the lieutenant governor. Right now, there is not a lieutenant governor of California. The man who previously held the job was a gentleman named John Garamendi. Mr. Garamendi sat in that office, and the funny thing about the lieutenant governor is the lieutenant governor just doesn't do anything on a daily basis. The only job the lieutenant governor has, he or she gets to attend board meetings of the UC and CSU systems. They get to sit on the California Land Commission, which actually is important when it comes to votes like offshore drilling. The Land Commission votes on maritime matters, go figure. But the lieutenant governor's job is mainly to replace the governor when the governor leaves California airspace. And in the event that, God forbid, something happens to the governor of California, lieutenant governor becomes governor. So the joke is basically lieutenant governor wakes up every day, checks the obituary page to see if the governor is in it. The governor's not in it. The lieutenant governor thus has to decide, do I go to work or go back to sleep? Then basically they go to work and then they go to sleep. When I worked for Pete Wilson, I'll let you in on a funny little story. We were very frustrated with Gray Davis, who was then lieutenant governor. His office was across the hallway from ours, and we coveted that office space. And we tried to figure out how to get him out of the office space, and he wouldn't budge. And so we actually thought that, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go in there one night and just remove all his stuff, move it elsewhere in the Capitol and set it up, and he'll show up the next day out of his office with nowhere to go but to his new office. We never pulled it off, but we thought about it. But that's essentially how frustrating a lieutenant governor is to a governor. They're not paired together like a president and a vice president, so it's not a tandem. I think the last two to work together were Ronald Reagan and a guy named Bob Finch, who he asked to do welfare reform. Lieutenant governor just is a non-entity. He gives a speech for 5 minutes before the governor speaks at the State of the State, which is usually a throwaway thing that nobody ever watches. Live TV doesn't start until the governor speaks, so nobody ever hears it anyway. He sits there, but it's a wonderful title if you're running for an office, because it sounds really powerful. Lieutenant governor, wow, this guy must really be important. Lieutenant governor, so people covet it even though it doesn't have any real power. The vacancy is there. Arnold Schwarzenegger appointed a gentleman named Abel Maldonado, state senator from over on the coast. His district covers from Monterey down to Santa Maria, a huge chunk of coastal California, not very populated except for wineries and cow farms and so forth. Maldonado is kind of controversial within Republican circles. He's a moderate. He broke with Republicans last year on the state budget deal, so Republicans are upset with him. And the Democrats, meanwhile, don't want to see him elevated to the job because they don't want him to turn around and run for the office as the incumbent. So you had this really just kind of bizarre situation in Sacramento last week where the Senate voted to confirm him, and then it went to the Assembly. They voted both the Senate and the Assembly for this. In Washington, confirmations are just the United States Senate, so California is more screwed up than Congress. How's that for a sad statement? But they took it to the Assembly, and Maldonado passed on a 37-35 vote, but timeout. 80 members of the state assembly. So to be confirmed, They claimed you need 41 votes, 41 out of 80. 37 out of 80 does not constitute a majority, so 37 is more than 35 equals a thumbs down, state government logic. So Maldonado was not confirmed according to the state assembly, so there it sits, thus leaving the governor with his options. What does he do? Does he pull the nomination, retreat, and call it a day? Does he swear him in anyway and say, come and get me coppers, take him out if you want to? Or Arnold did a clever thing, door number 3, he resubmitted the nomination and is going to make them vote on it again. These are the kind of silly games you get involved in Sacramento, and it's one reason why the state legislature right now sits at a whopping 15% in terms of approval. And to give you an idea of how pathetic a 15% approval rating is, I looked up John Edwards the other day. Senator John Edwards, former Senator John Edwards, former presidential candidate, cheated on his cancer-stricken wife, impregnated his mistress, maybe going to jail over various campaign violations. And guess what? His approval rating is 16% in North Carolina. So the state legislature in California is 1% less popular than John Edwards. And that, my friends, is pretty much hitting rock bottom. So we're going to vote all the lawmakers out of office this year, right? Wrong. And why is that? They're all locked into their seats thanks to redistricting. If Vladimir Putin lost his mind tomorrow and declared a new Cold War existed, and your parents wanted you to come home and dig a bunker in your backyard because bombs were about to fall, I would call the people who design the legislative districts in California because they know how to design things that are blast-proof and radioactive-proof. We had a statewide election in 2006. We had 40 assembly races and 20 Senate races. How many of those races do you think changed party hands? Not a one. Same as when it went into the election. We had the same deal. We had 20 Senate races and 40 assembly races in 2008. Not a single Senate race changed hands. 5 assembly seats changed hands. This is startling considering that they have a 15% approval rating, but that's how they're drawn up right now. That's why we passed legislative gerrymandering, legislative redistricting reform last year, and that's why right now, sure enough, the special interests want to go to the ballot this fall and undo the changes. How to fix Sacramento is a very complicated problem, and I hope you guys start paying attention to it because, frankly, my generation is going to be dumping it on your hands how to fix it. The obvious solution would be a constitutional convention, which is essentially the same as you opening up your laptop, and because it won't move, you just press Control-Alt-Delete and just kill the sucker and start over again. This has been talked about. The ballot reform effort actually started down the road, and guess what? First of all, the people who want to do the Constitutional Convention found it very difficult to find any firms that were willing to collect signatures. And why is that? Because any firm that collects signatures, and there are businesses out there in California that do this for a living, they came to the conclusion that if I do this for the Constitutional Convention, all those other fat clients that pay me a lot of money in elections are not going to work with me because they like the way that things work. So they could not find enough help to gather signatures. And then secondly, they couldn't get money. And why is that? Because people who donate to this effort realize that if I give money to this, the legislature is going to punish me. The governor may punish me down the road, so I don't want to get involved with this. So the reform effort in California is kind of frozen, if you will. What you guys need to be thinking about from your level is, okay, the state of California has put before me on this table, what do I fix? Do I want to fix the budget? Do I want to fix the political system? What exactly is before me? And I think the first challenge you're going to have in front of you is one of education. And it's not public education reform, it's educating voters as to what the challenges are in California. There was a scary poll out the other day by the Public Policy Institute of California, PPIC. They're up in San Francisco. And they asked the obligatory questions about who you're supporting in the election, blah, 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 blah. And they got down to the bottom of the ballot, and they asked me one of the scariest questions I've ever seen in a California poll. They started testing voters as to their actual knowledge of California politics and the California budget. They first asked California voters, what gets the most money in the state budget? What do you think the number one answer was? Survey said, people said prisons. 50% of the people said prisons get the most money in a California budget. 16% of the public said education gets the most money. How much money does education get in a California budget? A little over 50%. How much money do the prisons get? 10%. They get a dime on the dollar. Yet you have a majority of Californians out there think that prisons are where all the action is in California for spending. This thus makes it very easy for politicians to demagogue, and the legislature is guilty of this, and Governor Schwarzenegger is guilty of this too, beating about the prison system, saying if we just take money out of the prison systems, all our problems will be solved. Well, when you're looking at a budget that already has a 10% hole in it, you would have to take out all the money in the public in the prison system to fill the hole in the budget. Now, I don't think there's any voter in California who wants to zero the prison budget in California. So voters are going to have to be more aware of the options in front of them, how the budget is worked, where the money is spent, and then you have to make some very hard decisions. One hard decision is going to be on actual budget cuts. Another hard decision is going to be on taxes. If we're willing to tax, when and where. And Californians are distinctly of two minds on this. On the one hand, they say, okay, I'm kind of open for tax cuts if it goes to health care, if we do it for the kids, if it goes to education. But then you start getting into specifics of what do you want to tax? Gasoline? No. Personal income tax? No. Businesses? Well, maybe, I don't know. In other words, a tax increase just can't go through as planned. A couple years ago, the California Teachers Association and Rob Reiner teamed up, and they wanted to go after Proposition 13, the Howard Jarvis bill back in 1978, which puts a cap on property taxes for individuals and businesses. And what they want to do is they wanted to mess around with the property tax and increase it and put the money into education. Sounds like a winner, right? They went around and they tested it and focus grouped it, got slaughtered. They didn't even bother putting it on the ballot. So California is going to make very hard decisions along those lines. And then I think the other thing is California is going to have to decide, frankly, what group they belong to. Are they going to define themselves as Republicans down the road, Democrats down the road, or independents? And the trend that you see developing in our state right now, it's the DTS, the decline to state. People right now are looking for a little something better. And I think as you're looking to the next wave in California, maybe an election or two down the road, will somebody come along as an independent and run as a third-party candidate and go up to Sacramento as neither Republican or Democrat? And maybe that's the person who ends up being the dam buster in California. In theory, Arnold Schwarzenegger could have been this person in 2003 if he wanted to, running as an independent. Somebody with Meg Whitman's resources, maybe she could pull it off too. So look for that white knight down the road, that man or woman is really to run as a third-party candidate and see if they're really willing to upset the apple cart. But sadly, that's my message to you today. The ball is in your court, so go out there and vote, and you decide. So, questions. Actually, the first question, when do you guys need to get back to class? I know it's a nice sunny day, you're dying to get back to class.
We don't go to class. So.
You don't go to class. That's right. It's Stanford, you're too smart to go to class. Questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm just curious, you mentioned Scott Brown being a good Tea Party candidate, but I also heard that he's also pro-choice or certainly not avidly pro-life. So is the Tea Party just not as concerned with the social issues, or was he just able to downplay it, or how do you view the way he was able to ride the way with a pretty big issue that he's at least moderate or left of center on?
I think what it's a good question, and every politician, by the way, says that's a really good question. Thanks for asking that. They're scrambling. They're buying time trying to think of an answer. It is a good question though, because Brown tapped more into a movement than anything else. Because you're right, he is pro-choice. It'd be very interesting to watch him in the next few months ahead in the Senate to see where he lands on issues, because the assumption is he goes there as the 41st Republican vote, and he's just going to vote against every Democratic idea. He's looking at 2012 and his reelection already. He's thinking, boy, if I want to be viable in Massachusetts, I can't walk in step with the Republicans on everything. But I think from the Tea Party standpoint, they're first and foremost anti-incumbent. They're mad at Washington, and they want to take a pound of flesh out of either somebody from Washington or somebody to them represents Washington. And that's the trap that Coakley got into, because she was part of the Democratic/Kennedy machine in Massachusetts. Secondly, they're just absolutely worked up about bad ideas coming out of Washington, health care, TARP, the stimulus package as well. So I think when you look at the Tea Party, I would move it beyond kind of the traditional, abortion, guns, kind of things we've traditionally over the past couple decades defined Republicans versus liberals. I'd look at it more the actions of the last couple years in Washington, and actually taking it further back into the Bush years. I would also look at the prescription drug measure, just all these big spending ideas coming out of Washington that really tick these people off. And that's why, by the way, not to filibuster on this, what I mentioned earlier about the Senate races, Republicans are making an assumption right now that their candidates will benefit from the Tea Party. I think the Tea Party is going to look very hard at Republican incumbents as well and ask, are they part of the problem or part of the solution?
I wanted to ask you a quick question. As some of you may or may not know, Carly Fiorina put out an interesting ad that's been dubbed the Demon Sheep ad, and it has this kind of person in a sheep's costume crawling around in a field, and it's kind of, some people found it to be shocking and strange, and we were wanting to kind of find out your commentary and thoughts on that.
There are several categories of political ads. There's a political ad which is meant to get people to vote for you. There are political ads which are meant to get people to vote against your opponent. And then there are political ads that are meant to get you noticed. Kind of like Super Bowl ads, if you will. And that was kind of like a Super Bowl ad in that you all have seen the sheep ad, I trust, by now. Okay, well, go on YouTube, you'll find it. And you're actually going to find parodies of it now. It's, in fact, speaking of which, if you go on YouTube now, here's a fun thing. Tap in Hitler and Jerry Brown or Hitler and Jessica Simpson, and what you're going to find is the same spoof of the same video where it shows a scene from the movie Downfall with Hitler, and he's going off on this crazy rampage. And what people are doing is they're taking this, and instead of what Hitler's actually saying in the movie, in this one, for example, they have Hitler finding out that Tony Romo and Jessica Simpson have broken up. What do you mean I can't go to the birthday party now? That's what this ad is like, though. It really was kind of a way to draw attention, not so much to it was meant against Tom Campbell as not being suitably fiscally conservative, but I would actually argue that it was meant more to show that Carly Finney is saying, hey, I'm here and I'm alive. Pay attention to me, write about me. Sometimes those ads work in that they do draw attention to your campaign. Sometimes people also think you're nuts when you do them, so that's the problem with them. Interesting sidebar, the guy who did that ad is a gentleman named Fred Davis. He was a longtime veteran of Republican ads, and he did an ad for John McCain in the presidential election, which spoofed Barack Obama as a celebrity. It was the Barack Obama Paris Hilton ad. And you remember Paris Hilton then fired back with an ad of her own, and so these things can really be kind of a delicate thing to step around, but I think she's doing that just to get noticed. Yes, sir.
I noticed that. Absent in kind of like the hot issues facing America right now, it seems like the war is almost taking a back seat, and people aren't fixating on it as problems with Washington. So I just wondered what role you thought the war would play in the 2010 elections, and then even looking at 2012, I know Biden started to take credit for the surge in Iraq. Do you think that strategy is going to work for them?
No, and I think it'd be smart for them to kind of get out of the discussion. As much as Democrats will tell you they enjoy getting into a back and forth with Dick Cheney, that ultimately is not a good conversation for them. Anytime the Democrats spend a day talking about national security is not a good day for them, because that's not why you vote for the Democrats. There's this theory in American politics that the Democrats are the mommy party and the Republicans are the daddy party, and that you go to the mommy party for consolation, for empathy, for support. You know, your mom will always love you, she'll take care of you, no matter how hard you screw up, she'll give you a $20 bill and take care of you. Your daddy offers tough love. Your daddy protects you in times of crises and all that. If there's a noise downstairs, dad goes down to investigate, not mom. So the theory is that that it's better turf for Republicans. I should have mentioned this earlier in regards to the Senate race here in Boxer. If I were working for any of these Republican candidates, one issue that I absolutely push forward is the idea of detainment with would-be terrorists and interrogation, and really force her on this issue. If you look at the Washington Post poll that came out on Barack Obama the other week, it showed Obama having some really bad numbers on the economy and Democrats in general, but it showed one area that still works pretty well for him, and that's security. And that people still basically trust him on security. He's the President of the United States, and people want to trust the Commander-in-Chief on security. But within that question about security, there was a glaring weakness, and that was the question about terrorist detainment and about whether or not it should be lawyered up. And the public is overwhelmingly against that concept. So if I'm running against Barbara Boxer in California, and I don't think this matters whatever state you're in, I think you push as hard as you can on that issue, saying that this ultimately is a values question, my friend, and you treat this terrorist as a combatant or as a basic criminal, and really push that forward. So even though the war may not be the forward issue that it was in 2002 or 2004 or 2006, I think you'd still see it coming back to play very strong on that one issue, which is detainment. Questions? Yes.
I heard Steve Poizner answer questions last week, and I found him to be very impressive. And I know he doesn't have the name recognition of Whitman, but I understand he does have his own money. And I'm wondering if you think he has any chance.
He has a chance, but each day it becomes a longer and longer chance of winning. How many of you have seen the movie Election? Reese Witherspoon. Okay, Reese Witherspoon she plays this high school character named Tracy Flick. And Tracy Flick has been in about every high school committee and student government committee that she's been. And it's her senior year, and she's running, or junior year, and she's running unopposed to be student council president. And Matthew Broderick, who's a government teacher, hates the idea of her running unopposed, so he puts up the high school quarterback, the guy named Paul, the jock. Doesn't have much of a brain, but he's popular. And all of a sudden, he's ahead in the popularity contest. It drives Tracy Flick crazy. Every time she sees Paul, this psycho music goes in her head because she's worked hard for this. It's basically what Hillary Clinton went through with Barack Obama last year, by the way. Steve Poizner is kind of Tracy Flick in this election in that regard, in that he has been running for office or been involved in political issues in California since 2004. He is prepped for this. He talks to the press. He takes questions. He does public events. And Meg Whitman comes along. She outspends him. The first time in Poizner's life he's been outspent in a political campaign because he's not poor himself. And he can't put a dent into her. So I imagine that for him it just must be beyond frustration on a daily basis. This is about to come to a head, I think, by the way. The Republican Party has a convention down in Santa Clara on March the 12th, I believe, that weekend. And ordinarily there is a gubernatorial debate at that. And Whitman's already said that she will not debate. And she's scheduled to speak that Friday at the convention. I'll be very curious to see if she changes her mind and decides to debate, or if she sticks to her guns. And secondly, I'll be curious to see if the state party strips her of her ability to speak on Friday if she doesn't debate on Saturday. But for Poizner, here's the problem. He's behind by a bunch if you believe these polls right now. How do you make up this ground, and how do you make up this lost time? And the answer pretty obviously is I'll have to spend $20 million maybe and go negative against her. And he has to start thinking about his long-term prospects if he does that. The worst world for him, the worst case scenario would be if he spent a lot of money damaging her, but not defeating her, and then she limps into the general election against Jerry Brown, and she narrowly loses. And California governor's races, by the way, are kind of hit or miss. They either are 10 or 15-point elections, or they're whiskers, and this will probably be a whisker of an election. She could turn around and blame Steve Poizner for causing this trouble, and that would truly mess him up as a long-term prospect. So we'll see. By the way, the Democrats today launched their first independent expenditure against Whitman. You'll probably hear it on your radio, or you'll see it on TV very soon. And I think they made the calculation basically that Poizner is not going to do the body damage that they would like. So I think he's just caught in a bind right now, plain and simple. Yes, sir.
Do you think Sarah Palin has tarnished the image of the Republican Party?
Ooh, good question. Has she tarnished the image of the Republican Party? She's polarizing, and that's the problem at the end of the day. It's hard to find people who are either dispassionate about her or just don't have an opinion of her. And it seems to be a very visceral reaction. Either people viscerally like her and they kind of defend her and the concept of her, or they viscerally oppose her and the concept of what she is. I view it this way. I actually told reporters that McCain might pick her. Well, a few times in my life I've been right about something. You know, pig looks around long enough, he finds a truffle, right? It's I told them to look out for her, and I thought McCain actually made a very smart choice when he picked her because he desperately needed a shot of enthusiasm into that campaign, and it worked. But I think the problem now, especially as the McCain people are concerned, you know, those who criticize her, it's Frankenstein's monster. And now she's loose, and how do we stop her, and how do we want to bring her back in? I think she will have to make a very serious decision about her future not too long after the 2010 election, and that's who do I want to be in this life, and what do I want to be? Right now, life for her must be very, very good. She has a soapbox on Fox News. She can go around the country and, I assume, get pretty good money giving speeches. She got money at the Tea Party, I think, you know, like 20 grand or something like that. 100? Did she actually keep it, or did she give it back?
She gave it back, according to her.
Yeah, she gave it back. They found out that it was there. Okay, so she can maybe find some $100,000 speeches, which are hard to find out there, but she can maybe do that. She made a bunch of money off her book. It sure as hell beats living in Alaska year-round, I imagine. So does she want to do that, or does she want to spend her life going to Iowa and New Hampshire and Nevada and the other early primary states and run? I personally hope she will not run, not because I'm so anti-Palin or pro-Palin, but because you can see a really, really ugly fight brewing in the Republican Party. And it's going to be kind of a class warfare fight where she'll be representing kind of the we the people, you know, lower income, kind of more, you know, blue collar Republican primary voters, and Mitt Romney will be coming along. And what she'll do is she'll basically say, I'm economy class, and Mitt Romney, who was sitting in economy class when he got attacked the other way, by the way, she'll portray Mitt Romney as being white collar, business, first class, you know, wealthy guy, out of touch. And it'll be a very ugly scrap for Republicans. I just would assume that she stay out of it, to be honest with you. Yes, sir.
I'm just curious, as far as looking at Republican primaries, you know, Florida with the strong Tea Party candidate, and just do you see that these primaries are going to end up hurting Republicans because you're going to have a lot more infighting than you would hope for, or will it make the party stronger because then it'll force them to come up, with better ideas and not just say, well, I'm a Republican, so vote for me, but actually have the ideas that can actually win votes in general elections?
I don't think it's such a bad thing for Republicans as long as they can find a way to take the Republican voters, the Tea Party voters, as long as they can get them to vote Republican in the fall election. Again, the presumption is that Tea Party people are going to automatically vote Republican, and it's not the case. I think the cliche is they'll vote more for the man or the woman than they will the party in this case. So Marco Rubio is a very good example of this. I suspect he'll beat Charlie Crist. And it may not even be close at the end of the day, but then can he turn around and channel that? I think in his case, yes. A good measure of this will be a state like Missouri, where there's a Senate race to be contended, where it's a Republican seat right now and it's a toss-up. Can the Republicans win there? Can they turn around a state like Pennsylvania and harness it? So I think ultimately it's a good thing for the Republicans at the moment. The question will be this, though, for the Republicans, and that's how closely do you associate with the Tea Party movement? Because the thing about the Tea Party movement is you can see it kind of getting out of control at a certain point. It's kind of success will mess it up, if you will. It's like Ross Perot, if you will. Ross Perot started off as a really intriguing concept, this third-party person, and then he got too famous, he got too big for his britches, and it kind of got out of control really fast. And that's going to be the challenge for the Tea Party as well. Just how does it kind of keep itself organized and disciplined?
Sure, I have one final question. Unless there's
Question
another.
right there.
Sure.
So you're mentioning about Sarah Palin being a good choice for McCain, and it seems to be a decision which is purely based on who would help him get elected rather than say who would help him be a good president. And is it kind of thing just the nature of the election cycle, or is it more just unsustainable?
It's a nature of, look, the business of politics is to win elections. And as much as you'd like to sit there and say, I want to pick the vice president who's going to make me the best president, by goodness, you pick the person who's going to help you get elected ultimately. Joe Biden comes to the vice presidency with all the experience in the world. Has he made Barack Obama a better president? No. Palin's very much the same way, in the same boat. Again, I would defend the decision because just what other choice did McCain have out there for a running mate at the time? Maybe he could have maybe picked a Meg Whitman or something like that if he really just wanted to absolutely throw caution to the wind. The reality was he was looking at some pretty unspectacular people. He was looking at Tim Pawlenty, who's going to run for president in 2012. Would not have caused much for a ripple at the convention, if you will. He was looking at Governor Sanford from South Carolina. That would have been an interesting pick. Could have had a Sanford Edwards debate. That would have been a lot of fun. Gee, what would they have talked about? So no, I think that the Palin thing in retrospect, yeah, I mean, you want the best of both worlds. You want somebody, you want kind of the John Kennedy scenario is what you want. You want somebody who can get you a state that you sorely need to get you over the top. Without Lyndon Johnson, he maybe doesn't become president. You want somebody who is there who knows a thing or two, because Lyndon Johnson, if you read your history, was probably the most ruthless Senate Majority Leader of all time. He's a guy the Democrats would love to have right now. And on top of that, he was certainly qualified to be president should something have happened to John Kennedy, which he did. So there you are.
To take a question from Hoover's Facebook page, actually, a person had asked to give commentary on Senator Bayh's retirement and just in general on why so many Democrats during this year are retiring at this stage of the game.
Some of them are, it's the cliche as rats getting off the sinking ship. It's being one step ahead of the posse, if you will. If either you can retire and put a happy smiley face on it, or get kicked to the curb by the voters, you're going to retire and put a happy face on it. So that's why some of these gentlemen are stepping down. Bayh's case was fascinating because Bayh said, look, I am ultimately a centrist. I believe in bipartisanship, and Indiana politicians, by the way, are serious about this. If you look at the history, especially the Indiana congressional delegation, they tend to really work together and be very bipartisan. So he's serious about this. They said, look, I came from being a governor of Indiana to going to Washington, and this place just doesn't work, and I'm sick of it, and I'm out of here. Now, granted, it was a little more polite than that. First of all, he did not call Harry Reid and give him a heads up that he was quitting, which is a big slap in the face of Harry Reid. And then secondly, he pulled a real clever trick back in Indiana. Indiana state law says that in order to get on the ballot for an election, for a Senate election, you have to have 4,500 signatures. But 500 have to come from each of the 9 congressional districts in Indiana. and they have to be verified by the state election officials in order for you to get on the ballot. There's basically not enough time if you're a politician in Indiana to get on the ballot. So what this means is the Democratic Party leaders will probably pick their own candidate to replace Biden, which means they'll take a calculated look at who's the most qualified. There's actually one woman who may be on the ballot on the Democratic side, and she's a little Looney Tunes right now, but give her credit, she saw this thing coming down the road, so she's been qualifying her signatures, and I expect the Democrats in Indiana will do their best to try to keep her off the ballot. But in his case, this is what happens when it's both a tough election year, but I think in his case, he just came to the decision that I'm tired of this place. I've been in here for 12 years. Things won't get done. Keep in mind, this came right after they were talking about doing a bipartisan jobs bill. They got pulled at the last minute just because Reid decided, no, we just don't want to do it. So I think he just kind of had enough at that point and got out. But the other ones, they're making just a real political decision, which is that, I'm going down, so I'm out of here. Patrick Kennedy in Rhode Island is a good example. Yes, he talked about, having personal issues. He talked about missing his father. But if you looked at the polls in Rhode Island, his disapproval rating was hovering between 55 and 65%. So that was a guy who just had defeat written all over him.
Great. Thank you again, Bill Whalen, and thank you, Hoover Institution and the Stanford Review newspaper and the Conservative Society. We really enjoyed the talk today, and thank you to everyone who was watching online.
Okay.